that's something that I really regret from, building New Music Friday is, seeing the damage that workflow caused in terms of quality to an artist's brand.
Mike Biggane, welcome to the Manager's Playbook, man.
Thank you for having me.
I'm super excited to have you here on this podcast, and it's the first episode of the year. Wanted to make sure. I mean, everybody that comes on is a special guest. Thank you. Happy New Year to you as well, man. Happy 2026.
2026.
I think it's a important one to have at the beginning of the year because you are somebody who has been, if you don't mind me giving your flowers to you, somebody who has been so pivotal in this music business. A lot of artists and managers owe their careers to you. You are somebody who really championed a lot of people and really understand the business at a very nuanced level, from the tech side to the artist side to the business side. There's so much with you, and it's an honor to have you here on the podcast. Mm-hmm. I'm going to read just a couple of highlights from your career here, but so you were at Spotify between 2014 to 2019. From 2014 to 2018, you were the pop editor at Spotify. Mm-hmm. And in 2018, you became head of global genre groups.
Yeah.
And then in 2019, you became Spotify's global head of curation.
Yeah.
So in that era that you're at Spotify, Editorial, you guys are, kingmakers.
We had a special group.
Yes, you did. Yeah. You did, definitely.
Yeah.
John, Tuma, you. There was, I'm probably missing some names, I'm sure.
Doug Ford.
Ford, that's right.
He's the one who put it all together.
That's right. And then in 2019, you basically got hand selected by Sir Lucian Grange, and you went to UMG, and if I'm not mistaken, you were the EVP of Music Strategies and Tactics.
Yeah.
And you were there until 2024, and then you left.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
That's when we met.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you were in UMG in 2019, and we were just talking about it.
Well, that's not entirely true. We met really briefly at the Spotify Best New Artist party. It was one of the Spotify parties that Jesse played.
Okay.
And you guys were walking through the crowd. And I was like, oh, that's Ruiz, because I'd heard so many good things about you. So it was a very fleeting moment,
really?
Around like thousands of people while you were trying to escort your artists through.
Right.
But yeah, the first time we ever sat down was
sat down. Yeah, and, to be honest, I was fascinated. Well, I don't remember, but it's great that you heard good things about me.
Yeah.
But what I do remember is when I sat down with you at the Polo Lounge and with Byron, I was like, Mike Biggane was this mythical figure in the music business. You always heard about Mike Biggane. And then when I sat down with you, I was like, yeah, I understand why. This person is way ahead of the game when it comes to understanding the nuances of it. And because you worked at Spotify and you had a lot of information, and when you're at UMG, again, you were at what they call the center.
Yeah. I've been, honestly really blessed to be where I was in two very, pivotal points in the music industry, and, to be able to, see the music industry change, when Spotify, started to get popular, and then again, to be able to, see the music industry change again with, TikTok, but then sit down next to Lucian and learn about all of the, business problems that I didn't get to see when I was at the platform, So, I've been really privileged to work with a lot of really talented people. And like, honestly, it's like a lot of like right place at the right time, but then just like hustling and, recognizing that like, this is such an incredible opportunity. That like I can't take my foot off the gas. Like when I was at Spotify, during that period of time, like it felt like it was just pure magic. But you also knew that like you can't stop, like if you slow down, like things don't happen.
Okay, so tell me what that was like at that point, because let's start there then.
Yeah.
All right. Because, when you were at Spotify, 2014, pretty new to the music business.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that we should talk about as well is there's no New Music Friday.
Mm-hmm.
You are the person who introduced New Music Friday to the world, more or less, right?
Yeah.
Let me say that again. You are the person who introduced New Music Friday to the world, more or less, correct?
Me and my team. Yeah.
Did you conceptualize it?
Yeah, I conceptualized it on a drive back from Boston. Like, you have to remember, like, back then, there wasn't any real like programming surface on Spotify, right? So you had a search bar, you had a user collection, and you had songs, and that was pretty much it. And then the browse team, which was my first team at Spotify, we were in charge of programming the music. And it's not like a novel idea, right? Like,
right.
The best new songs of the week. And to, full transparency, like the person who really, I think, like, was, again, like the secret sauce in this is this guy, Doug Ford. Like, he was really the architect of bringing all of these like really special people together. And the idea for New Music Friday, it was New Music Tuesday back then, was, me driving back from Boston, which was, where the Echo Nest was, which is the personalization team.
Oh, okay.
So there was like, and this is, really interesting too. There was like two really critical acquisitions that Spotify made in 2013, early 2014. Like, one was this company called Tuna, which at the time there was an app store in Spotify, and the number one app in the app store was this company that made playlists.
There was an app store in Spotify?
An app store in Spotify.
I remember that, okay.
So Spotify ends up acquiring Tuna, and it's human curation. And that was my team. And then they acquired this company called the Echo Nest.
Okay.
That was based out of Boston, and they were the algorithmic programming team. So that was really, I think Daniel Ek's like initial, bet, like who's going to win? Is it going to be the humans or is it going to be the algorithm? And in the early days, the, humans had the lead because we could react faster.
Okay.
We could see data coming in, and we could, qualify that data, and we could make a programming decision right away. Whereas the algorithms, they needed time.
So algorithms were already in play at this time?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that was that with the Echo Nest? That was the company?
That was the Echo Nest. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got you.
Led by Jim Lucchese, who is at Berklee College of Music now. I think he's the new dean. But he started this company called the Echo Nest. They, their claim to fame was they were I'm not going to probably remember this properly, but they were involved in like the Pandora like algorithm, the World Music Genome Project is what it is. So it was like very early days of like programming. And apologize to Echo Nest people because I'm not remembering that story properly. But they were the smart people, the scientists who are sitting down and looking at all of these different like data pieces, and we were the human curators. And because we had really come from like radio programming, we had a lot of that instinct in us when we were developing a lot of these strategies. So we were, humans versus the algorithm. And during, one of these trips back from Boston, at the time there was 5,000 songs being released a week on Spotify, and they were just getting dumped, into this playlist. And it was like, hey, let's come up with a weekly new music playlist. And Doug Ford christened it, New Music Tuesday. And then, I basically would have to wake up at 3 a.m. every single morning, because at the time, like, the record labels wouldn't send us release schedules. Like, they hated us.
Right.
Because, obviously we were there to destroy the music industry.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a little break, because if you're listening and thinking, fuck, I could really use some guidance right now, and you're serious about building your career in the music industry, I'm now offering private strategy sessions. These are fully personalized, just you and me tackling whatever you need in your career. With over 16 years of experience working with artists, managers, and brands, I can help you map out your next moves. Now, whether that's structuring your team, scaling your brand, navigating the industry, even figuring out what steps to take, whether to go to a distributor or to a record label, and figuring out what are the best deal points, I can help you with your career with where you're at. You can now book a one-on-one with me through my Calendly, and you can find the link in the description. Now let's get back to the pod.
So we wouldn't get release schedules, and we were living in Saratoga, New York at the time, which is where the first Editorial team, which is this like really tiny town in upstate New York, we were isolated from the rest of the industry. So we didn't have, the promo people, looking over our shoulder, asking us what we were going to program. We could be able to do that in peace. So, I would wake up, 3 a.m., every single Monday night. I would look at the blogs, look at what was being released that week. And then I would put together this playlist. And that was literally, every single week from the day that I started until the week that I left Spotify. It got easier, over the course of the years as it became popular, and people cared about it.
When did it become from New Music Tuesday to New Music Friday? And when did there is a specific story that you told me about, the cover to New Music Friday, which I would love for you to share. But when did it start to become a thing? Because I think, for context here, obviously when you're saying you're here to destroy the music industry,
I'm kidding.
Some might think you're not, but
we were there to destroy the old music industry.
Correct. Correct.
If we were there to be able to decouple from the fact that this one, power, group had control over like programming, US radio.
Yes.
You couldn't break unless you were getting signed to a major label.
Millions of dollars being spent on you to be able to go do these promo runs, and you had to go through radio, and just the gatekeeper era.
Totally. And we had this great stuff called data, that we could use to justify like what we were doing. And we knew we were right because we were looking at the data, and we were making decisions based off of not our opinions, but what the users like wanted, which is like a really, I think, like difficult thing for the music industry to be able to understand, is that we as an industry have been, working around these quantitative sales KPIs,
right,
based off of an old model that doesn't exist anymore.
1950s. Right?
Yeah, not even up until 2016.
Well, I mean, right? But I mean, started in 1950, like antiquated from like, we're talking about 70 years. Yeah.
And now you've got these platforms where their KPI is user experience.
Right.
And that's not easy to see in numbers that you have to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are more qualitative.
Right.
And that takes a level of nuance, but we could see that at Spotify. And that's what allowed us to break away from radio and say that, we are doing these things in the best interest of our users, and the data is justifying this. And it took a really long time for the people that love Spotify now to like come on board. There was a lot of kicking and screaming, in 2014, 2015, even going into 2016.
Interesting. What was it, do you think, that was the turning point? If there was a specific...
I think it's the money, like they started making money from streaming, and then once the
labels did.
The labels did,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then once they, started making money from streaming, then the strategy inside the label changed. Like artist development, got handed over to the managers, because the managers were the ones that had to stay with the artists every single week after they didn't get New Music Friday,
Right.
or they didn't get the playlist. It was the manager's responsibility to be able to develop the artist. Whereas the label, the A&R strategy started to change from, I'm going to try to, sign one Lady Gaga, and I'm going to spend, 2-3 years developing her. And I'm going to sell 1 million copies of this one master, and everybody's going to be happy because we know how to split up the money into, I'm getting paid off of a market share.
Mm-hmm.
And now I need to sign, 10 Lady Gaga lookalikes who are all going to release 10 songs. And on the aggregate, we're going to have as many streams, and the revenue from that is going to equal what I used to get from album sales.
Right.
And we're still living in that world, which is crazy,
Yeah.
but that's what we're doing, like we're still spending all of our money, before it even comes out on Spotify, on socials, to try to create, demand and hype so people will go search for it and then go play it on Spotify.
What do you mean? Break that down a little bit.
I just mean like we're still so used to trying to get a win within the first 28 days of release.
Yeah.
Which is the new release window, right? Which is the sales window, which is something that has been in existence in the music industry for 100 years.
Right.
Right? Like you put out a new product, you go out and you try to sell it, right? Like when we moved into streaming, that was a new release workflow. It was based off of the iTunes store, which updated every single, week to put in, new content. The reason being is because the people who were originally assigned to Spotify and Apple Music, like back in the day, were like remnants from iTunes. They were like downloads people. Everybody back then just assumed that digital was the same thing, so let's like give them to the salespeople.
Right.
And we got, New Music Friday, which is an iTunes store, changes over every single week.
Yeah.
And that was the music industry for, basically up until 2019 and TikTok, emerges.
And so that happens, and I love all that. Tell me that one story about the cover art that you were trying to get for New Music Friday.
This is like a really funny story, and I hope we don't get sued for the reason.
Get this man the talent release immediately, so I'm not.
The reason why you have artist images on playlist covers is because the very first week of New Music Tuesday, there was a new Ariana Grande song coming out. I want to say it was like, no, it wasn't that song. It was Ariana Grande, My Everything kind of era. And the label wouldn't approve the image. So the very first week that we did New Music Friday, it was just a generic image of a record store. New Music Tuesday, a generic image of a record store. But we could see that there was, something there. Like even the first week, we had like really strong numbers for it. So the next week,
for the record, for the song of the playlist.
For the playlist. Yeah, the playlist had, the way that they measure it is, I don't know if they still do it this way, but they used to measure it based off of daily active users. So how many people are using that playlist in a single day, so it's really easy to see when you've got, a playlist like New Music Tuesday, New Music Friday, because it's one day. Right? Like you can see what the numbers are. So the very first week, we could see that there was something there. And the next week, there was a Demi Lovato like song coming out, and I was reaching out to Rosa Ashola, who's at Amazon Music now, who's amazing.
Oh,
and
she's the best.
Yeah, and her and Jordan Gremley and Mark Williamson and Royston Langdon, who were like the very first artist services team
Oh, wow.
at Spotify, because we didn't have any contact, we didn't know anybody, So I reached out to, I think, Jordan to get me an image of Demi Lovato, and he didn't get a response in time, so I was just like, fuck it, and put like Demi Lovato on the cover, and it like, again, like week number 2, like skyrocketed. And then we were just like, all right, let's put, artist images like on the cover more.
Yeah.
Like, now, whether that is the actual like true story, or that's just like how I'm remembering it, because like there was also like maybe like an Ed Sheeran on a Today's Top Hits cover that may have happened once, but it was really we didn't know, I guess, at the time.
And I think the thing what I'm really trying to drive the point towards is that there was a lot of innovation happening at that period in time. And labels were very hesitant because, we're talking about just a nosedive of revenue coming into the music industry. And here comes streaming, where they don't understand the significance of it. And all they're seeing is per stream is 0.0 or whatever that number is. Which I know is a pool, and I'd love to talk a little bit more about that, because it leads into where we're at in 2026. But there was a lot of hesitation around that innovation. Although, to credit, I think Lucien is, he did do the deals with the DSPs to make this happen.
Totally.
Ultimately. So, but now we go into, let's say now, 2025, and a lot has changed, because you just said as well, UGC started to come in very heavy with the TikTok. TikTok is completely changed the game again. What did you see when that started to happen with TikTok? Because prior to that, you went from 5,000 songs to 80,000 songs.
Totally.
A day.
Yeah.
Being uploaded.
Yeah.
And I think now who even knows how many songs are being uploaded every single day?
No, I mean, I think about that period and how lucky I was to be able to go from, Spotify, where I was kind of like, like Rose on the, the front of the Titanic, where I can see everything, I could see everything that was coming, like all different genres, different types of music, things like that, the different trends that were happening.
Yeah. Because of what you were seeing on the back end? You were
just from seeing on the back end, but then, Spotify at that point in time was really like the hub of discovery.
For sure.
Right. So like that's where all of the excitement was happening. And we were, and I'm sure they still are, trying to represent that, as much as we could, in the programming experience. But then, being able to see the shift to TikTok, and then at the same time, like going over to UMG, and like immediately going into Lucien's office and seeing some of these deals that were getting discussed, was like wild, because you don't think about like how much something costs when you're working at like a tech company. Like everything's free, like everybody's your friend, everybody, every party you want to go to, you don't, and that's not to say that, we didn't care, we didn't have an emotional connection with the art. Like absolutely you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you leave and you see the other side of the business and the reality of, the reason why, some deals get done, some don't get done, why some artists get worked and why some other artists don't get worked. It's not black and white, and I think like being able to go in and just see the other, the animal side of the music industry.
Mhm.
You know, it was a very like eye-opening, experience. But
Yeah.
I just mean in terms of like, again, back to what I was saying like earlier, like once streaming market share started to overtake album sales as the primary source of revenue, the A&R strategy changed.
Completely.
You know, so then it became, all right, how can we forecast, how much this viral song is going to bring us in terms of immediate market share, and let's go write a check like right below that, and then that's going to give us our market share numbers for the month, and we'll make the money we want to make, but what ends up happening, and I think what they all like, I mean like the majors, really found out is that it's almost like a one night stand, where like after the viral moment's over, they're sitting there next to an artist that's a stranger to them. They didn't develop them for 4 years. They didn't sit in the studio. They acquired an asset,
right,
to get paid.
Copyright.
And you got put into the factory line.
Yeah.
So being able to see that side of it, and then the challenges that go into that, like the people who are working at the record label, like they would love to spend, the time needed to develop an artist, but they've got these revenue targets that they have to hit because of the market share,
Yeah, exactly.
Numbers, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And at the same time, you have marketing start to change, and the power, shift from, now the playlists are starting to fall. Like they aren't doing, New Music Friday is not doing what it was doing, in 2018 and, before that.
Why was that?
Well, I think a couple like different things, like totally being like,
Please.
like, the biggest thing is personalization, right? Like Spotify went from a regional programming model, which is what the music industry, lived by for the first, 75 years of existence, like one to many.
With radio, you're talking about city,
yeah, but
city
even,
to city.
And
right?
the first era of Browse and Editorial at Spotify too. It was like you're programming for the entire country.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then, when they moved over to the homepage, everything became personalized,
Yep.
which meant that the way that music is distributed on Spotify changed overnight. It went from one to many to one to one. And because of the algorithms that Spotify uses, which are exploitive algorithms, it means that they need your data. They need your listening history in order to have the confidence to program something for you. So like the reason why the first era of Spotify, like the humans were winning, is because people like me could go look at the data. We can make a calculation in our head and then go and sit in front of a computer and press a button, and it's going to impact everybody in the region, right? Like now with an algorithm, it takes time for them to acquire the amount of data that they need to have the confidence to be able to program something to you. And then on top of that, you've got, we all have different tastes.
For sure.
Right? So we could be fans of the same artist, but we're going to get programmed that song at drastically different times depending on, you like rock, I like hip hop, so I get the song 6 months after you,
right?
Which meant that this new release workflow that we had been like swearing by for the first, 100 years of the music industry now doesn't do anything.
It's just non-existent.
It's non-existent, right? So what
but we
ends
still
up,
act like it is.
Well, exactly, right? So what ends up happening is that the playlists start to fall. Now there's other reasons outside of just personalization that happened, like real world stuff, right? Like a big part of the reason that like certain people like left at that time is that it stops being fun, you know, like after the IPO, you know, I think like things change, right? Like podcasts were a thing, you know, like no one was really as excited about music as they were, you know, previously, right? So you start to lose.
Once it IPO'd, you're talking about in the C-suite?
Not just in the C-suite though, but like
just in general.
Just in general. Like I counted it up once, and there was something like 20 key people that left Spotify, you know, post IPO. You know, like 20 key decision makers.
Wow.
Like think about like if 20 key people left from UMG.
Right.
You know, how many people in the industry would be talking about that?
Yeah.
Right. But that happened, you know, and you started to, you know, have the soul kind of leave,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I think that that's no, you know, shade on, you know, Spotify and, you know, what I'm sure it's like, it's incredibly challenging, you know, trying to keep like all of that and keep that
emotion
in the soul, you know, while you're also trying to, you got to make money now.
Yeah.
You're a publicly traded company, right?
Yep.
Which means like you got to make a profit.
Yeah.
You know, and things like podcasts, like, and, you know, other ways to improve your margins are, you know, attractive to a lot of, you know, financial people.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, because
everybody.
Yeah. Right. Well, and to your point, when you have an initial public offering, that's exactly what it is. You are now beholden to the public.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to make sure that stock price is going up.
For sure.
Go down. So then that becomes like the, you know, when things become corporatized. I think there's a lot of people that would argue that it's kind of the same thing happened at UMG as well.
Totally. Like, which was crazy because then I got to see it again. Right? Like how the culture and, you know, I think again, you're beholden to shareholders.
Yes.
You know, you got to hit revenue targets, and, you know, going back to these people, you know, working at the labels, you know, they have these, in a lot of cases, very unattainable revenue targets.
Yeah.
And that forces you to, as much as you may care about an artist, you know, like you also need to get paid. You know, you got a family you got to take care of, you know? So that's kind of I think the reality that the music industry has been, you know, struggling with like the last couple of years, is that we're not in this album sales model anymore. And we need a new mindset and a new way of thinking about how our industry is going to look, you know, in the future going forward.
And in many ways, the major labels have definitely signaled that in the last couple of years. They've changed their model.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah. I can tell you exactly when it happened.
Okay.
There was an article that came out in Goldman Sachs in 2022 called Music in the Air. That was written by a very brilliant person who's now, I believe, the strategy person at Warner. But Music in the Air, you know, that year said that there was $4 billion in superfans. And I think that, you know, after a few years of looking at, you know, these viral signings that hadn't, you know, panned out, you know, like, you know, it goes back to the one night stand scenario where, right, not only do you have like a stranger, you know, like sitting across from you, but you got to pay people money to be able to spend time with that stranger, you know, like,
that you don't. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, what are we doing these viral signings for?
Right.
You know, like we're losing money. You know, we can't get, you know, new release market share anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because New Music Friday is not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we can't consistently get a return for new music.
Mm-hmm.
So like, why are we spending, you know, all of this money on these viral signings that aren't panning out anymore? Why are we spending all of this money on these macro creators like Charlie D'Amelio? You know, think about how wild that is that people were spending $50,000
easy
on a post with no attribution.
What is attribution? What does attribution mean?
Attribution in the sense of you don't know whether the post you're buying is influencing the streams that you're getting,
and ultimately that's
on streaming, and that's what you're trying to do.
Yes,
right. Like your marketing budget and what your goal of your marketing budget is to try to spend the least amount for the highest amount of streams.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like you want to have the most efficient marketing strategy possible.
Mm-hmm.
And spending, you know, crazy amounts of money on TikTok in the hopes that people are gonna, you know, come back to, you know, Apple Music, Spotify through search,
right?
You know, was literally the strategy, you know, up until I think this article like came out. And then at that point, I think the decision was made like across the board, like we shouldn't be providing services in the same way that we were, because we're not making money off of new music in the same way that we were before.
Because of the personalization.
Because this is all out the window.
Yeah.
So therefore, why don't we go focus on merchandise, direct to consumer, like superfan products, you know, while everything else gets sorted out with AI. You know,
interesting.
And that has literally been, you know, we're going into 2026. Like that's been the last 3 years, you know, like look around at what is happening in terms of like the layoffs. It's all the marketing people. Like it's all the people who are supposed to be providing services to artists. Like we're not interested. The macro music industry isn't interested in providing services in the same way because they recognize that those marketing workflows don't work.
They don't have a return
anymore. They don't have a return.
Yeah.
You know, like they're right, by the way.
Yeah.
Like,
they're not, yeah, exactly.
Like they have
you see
to.
It.
Yeah.
We would see it. I see it all. I mean, you still see it to this day, right?
Absolutely.
It's, you would get told that there are these companies that do UGC.
Mm-hmm.
And you had these macro influencers, Charlie D'Amelio's of the world, and you go and spend 50,000 for her would be one post, but then, you know, sometimes you do like 20,000 for a campaign, you get back the results, you look at the streams on the back end and you're like, it didn't move.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening here? And that kind of became the go-to a lot in many ways. But so if I'm like to kind of just put this all in one, you know, summarize it a bit, what we're saying here is 2018, 2019 homepage becomes personalized on Spotify, right? Mm-hmm. So at that point, effectively, we are now basically saying New Music Friday, new music doesn't even matter because you're going to listen to whatever the data is telling me and we're going to feed that back to you,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So at this, and now, okay, does that happen because TikTok comes into play? Why does the personalization happen? Is that a necessary evil?
I think, you know, yes, like it was on the horizon.
It was no choice.
Always.
Almost, right?
Yeah. You know, I think there's things that, you know, probably could have been done differently. I'm sure like there were certain safety measures that they tried to put into place, you know, in order to make sure that, you know, personalization didn't, you know, just absolutely like negate like new music, but like ultimately, well, the thing is though, is that it's the algorithms, the way that they work.
Yeah, please.
Right. Is that they need data to make a programming decision.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and the thing is when it comes to new music, there's not a lot of data. You know, there's more data for catalog, which is why, you know, the catalog music started to really go viral during COVID, right? It was right around the same time that Spotify introduces discovery mode,
right?
You know, which just started as a catalog tool, right? Because they have more confidence because they have more data in the older stuff versus like new music, you know, you don't have, it requires, you know, an element of anticipation, which was what the human editorial team was really good at, right? Like we were looking at culture so we could see what was coming and we were, you know, actioning on that. We were anticipating that Billie Eilish was going to be Billie Eilish. You know, we were anticipating that Post Malone was going to be Post Malone. And the algorithms can't really do that yet. You know, a really, like one of my favorite like Spotify stories is the guy who originally curated Rap Caviar, who's at YouTube now, Tuma Basa.
Okay, yeah.
Like literally one of the most brilliant people you're ever gonna meet in your life. And
culture.
Oh,
culture. He was on the pod. He was. Yeah.
He's like literally one of my favorite people that has ever existed.
Always been solid, great, but just a level of intelligence that's just unmatched. Especially so the culture of the music. Just music is in his DNA. It's in his bloodstream. You know?
He breathes it, and he's such a thoughtful person. I was very privileged to work with those people that, you know, at both of those companies, you know, smartest people in the world. Like he was one of the people that I have like such a strong admiration for, just because of like who he is like as a person. But the story that I wanted to like, and this is like a great anecdotal story for Tuma, right? But it goes to also what I was saying in terms of like the new music and how, you know, human curation is still important. We're seeing it in, you know, college radio coming back and things like that. But Tuma, you know, I was always known in the industry as like the data guy.
Yes.
Everybody was like, you know, Bigane's got data. He's going to go crunch his KPIs and things like that. And there was a night that I was curating new music Friday at this point. We were in the 18th Street office in New York City. And it was like 2 a.m. And like, I'm like just tired, like, cause I've been doing meetings all day and like, I'm getting all this flood of like music I got to listen to. And I'm still like, you know, taking it super serious. So I want to make sure that everything that's getting programmed is like the right thing. And I'm frustrated. And I'm sitting next to me and Tuma's here, and we used to have these like exercise balls, you know, the big ones that you kind of like sit on. And he's just like rocking back and forth, like looking at his cell phone. And I'm just like, dude, what are you doing? You know, it's 2 a.m. Like, go the fuck home. And he's like, I'm doing exactly what you're doing. I'm like, what? And I look, and this is, again, it's 2016. Right? Like this is before meme culture. It's before like all of this stuff. And he's going through and he's curating Rap Caviar by going through and looking at World Star and looking at hot new hip hop. And he's looking to get the culture's approval to be able to act on something. And that was like the biggest like eye opener to me, for me to recognize that I needed to find more data than this reactionary exploitive stuff that requires a a lot of time to be able to put together for me to make a programming decision. I need to figure out a way to be able to move faster, like looking off platform to see what the culture is doing. But that was like Tuma inherently, like knowing that. He wouldn't call it data.
Right.
You know, that's 100% what he was doing. He was data mining.
Yeah.
You know, he's looking at what the other, you know, leaders in the culture are getting behind. And then that was his justification for programming, you know, and that I think, you know, to me, it was something that like really set me on a path to like, oh shit, now I got to figure out social, you know, because there's this whole other world over here, like outside of Spotify.
Does he know that?
You know, does Tuma know that story?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I like told him, but yeah, I'm sure I've told him that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Oh man,
when you
I
get
didn't
to
pee myself.
what's that?
I just spilled water on myself.
Oh, that's all good. It's crazy that you talk about that. It just seems so long ago.
Mm-hmm.
Because
it's 10 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, time flies.
Yeah.
But we're at a point now where it's hard to determine culture, culture of music, of like what is making sense today. And, you know, like we said, like everything is so personalized. What he might be listening to versus her and versus you and I is so different.
Yeah.
And so everything is kind of everywhere right now. And so in 2026, right, where does this all kind of go now? Because there's so many things have changed. And we talked about the direct to fan that the labels have definitely positioned their business
for sure
to look like. And now it's, you know, that was 2022, 2025, going into 2026, 3 or 4 years of AI sorting itself out.
Yeah.
It seems like 2026 is going to be a pretty important year to get a lot of this stuff figured out and actually start to monetize in a real way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I think so.
I think so too. And I think if you just follow the breadcrumbs and listen to Mike Biggane, you can pretty much, you know, understand what's going on here a little bit. So, and I want you to talk about it, but one thing that you showed me, and it was pretty telling, it was, you know, the Lucian Grange memo that came out, you know, a couple of months ago.
Yeah. And
it's basically his take on the world of AI. And there's one thing here that he says where, and I'm just going to read it. And he says, how our artists can participate. Based on what we've done with our AI partners to date and the new discussions that are underway, we can unequivocally say that AI has the potential to deliver creative tools that will enable us to connect our artists with their fans in new ways and with advanced capability on scale we've never encountered. What is he talking about?
Well, that memo, which we both read in Music Business Worldwide, and we didn't get it in any other unethical ways.
No. I read it in Billboard Pro.
Yeah, exactly.
I read it in Billboard. Yeah. Not in unethical ways.
You know, I love, you know, reading those things because, you know, being like inside that building and, you know, seeing how thoughtful, like every single, you know, word in that article is crafted, you know, because they're very well aware that, you know, it's going to be getting read. And I think that there's a lot of
the signals.
There's breadcrumbs in there, right? Like there's breadcrumbs that, you know, that you can read between the lines and you can get an idea on, you know, how they're trying to position themselves, you know? And I think that, you know, obviously like AI is electricity, you know, like there's this really great book called I feel like it's called I think it's called The Prediction Machine. But they talk about the first 40 years of before the first light bulb was invented and the first town was, electrified, or illuminated. And it was 40 years, right?
Really?
Between the invention of electricity and, people having like a refrigerator, so like we haven't even, and it goes without saying, like we haven't even begun.
A bunch of people didn't want to give up the candles. Huh?
Totally. Well, yeah, right. Like it's like people going out and lighting up like streetlights, like at night. Like technology like changes things, and like guess what? Like the streaming era of the music industry wasn't that great for everybody.
Nope.
Like a lot of people that songwriters, publishers, especially that did, very well in album sales and everybody was like all happy, now all of a sudden, are kind of getting like the short end of the stick, like also like nothing, evolved outside of the new music, workflow at Spotify. All the playlists are just, new released. Like we tried to extend as much as we could, but it was all just new release.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. So that turns over every 6 days.
Totally, right? But like the way that the industry was started is that you would have a sales team, go out and make sure that your product was everywhere. Like led by your marketing team, like putting together a go-to-market strategy. And then you would have your radio promo team take that sales data and they would go market to market in order to acquire audience. And that audience would convert to sales. And that's how we had these big 2-year like album cycles. And then when we got into streaming, because the only people like in the early days of Spotify that we were allowed to talk to was the salespeople, meant we couldn't talk to marketing. We couldn't talk to promo, so it was really difficult to be able to align, this new release workflow that's changing over every single week with like the music industry, that is like, very slow. We go things at our own pace, and and that caused a lot of songs to be streaming songs that no audience around them. Like we couldn't figure ourselves out, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We couldn't align like artist development with programming. We couldn't align marketing with playlisting strategy. Like, everything was kind of like moving in its own direction. Yeah. Everything was like very territorial.
Yeah.
And, I think the thing that the Goldman Sachs article, brought up that was like really important is how critical fans are to like this new era of the music industry. Right? You look at like short form and social, right? 40% of all content on TikTok is modified. It's a UGC, remix. It's a mashup. It's something.
40%?
This is like 2 years ago. It's probably more than that now.
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, that's why, like, the reason why things move faster on TikTok is because those products are built for algorithmic distribution.
Yeah.
The reason why the new release market share fell, is because the ability for you to get one master recording around the world in 28 days, is impossible anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Versus when you look at, something like TikTok, the difference between Spotify and TikTok in terms of distribution. On Spotify, the song is the currency of the playlist. And it's the playlist that's distributed across the programming surface, whether it's a human curated playlist or algorithmic, curated playlist. The playlist is the distribution vehicle. That's what people go to be able to listen to music. And the playlists that you see the reason why you see them is because they are achieving Spotify's programming values. They're improving user experience, so that's why when you wake up and you see like some type of, programming experience, they think that you're going to like it,
Yep.
and you're going to listen longer.
Yep.
Right. Versus TikTok, the sound is the currency of the video, and it's the video that's distributed across the programming surface. And there's multiple sounds carrying multiple videos. So there's more opportunities for you to find audience with these short form platforms because they're using derivatives to be able to continually, fire and find new audience. The other, important distinction as well is that TikTok doesn't care that you like it. They just care that you're interested in it.
Yep.
Spotify cares that you like it, and it takes longer for them to understand that you like it, which is why music travels slower there than it does on short form platforms like TikTok.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, because there's more opportunities for them to program you something. Because on Spotify, you just got one master recording that's sitting in a queue, along with what 1 million songs are being released a week now or something like that, So like there's 999,000, other options for them to program other than your song, like
in that week. Yeah.
In that week, unless there's user experience there to support it. And it, requires time to gain the data to say that, this is proving user experience.
Yeah.
TikTok doesn't have that problem.
And so you said that TikTok doesn't have that problem because
of the distribution, strategy that they've got, which is essentially you've got an official sound, and then you've got UGC, which are in a lot of cases derivatives, of a master.
Let's talk about that, derivatives.
Totally.
I think that's a important word
for
the music business moving forward in the next few years.
Agreed.
Tell me more about that.
Well, I just think that, we know that, derivatives work, in personalization.
Well, what's a derivative, first and foremost?
Well, a derivative, in the case of like TikTok, we're talking about like the sped up, the slow down mashups, the Nicki Minaj, Four Non Blondes, like Bees in the Trap. That's a derivative, right? It lives on TikTok and it can't go anywhere else because it doesn't have a commercial license. And it's a nightmare to try to get clearances for those things because of all of the different, black holes that is publishing, right? Like, especially when you're talking about like, songs that were released in the 90s, like there's a lot of, all of the, the music industry, I guess, wasn't as intelligent, back then in terms of record keeping as they probably are now.
Right.
So you have all of these, modified, derivatives of something that go viral on TikTok, because it's easier for TikTok to distribute them. It's very rare that you have the official sound, go viral on TikTok. Right now, let's take that same scenario and put it over to Spotify, where all you have is the official sound. How many things would go viral if we were just looking at official sounds on TikTok?
Not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot.
Yeah.
Right. So like, and on top of that, derivatives are better suited for personalization, right? Like, so in the current model where, we're fans of the same artist, but we have different tastes, we're going to get programmed that song at drastically different times, with a derivative, you could like a hip hop version, I could like a rock version, and we're going to get that song on day one.
Yeah.
Now, the issue, is the licensing.
Yeah.
You know, like how do you make sure that the rights holder gets paid for that derivative that's out there? Like currently, like that doesn't happen on TikTok.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why that stuff just stays there.
And it stays there. The only way the rights holder gets paid is if I actually go off platform on TikTok and I actually go on to Spotify or a DSP and listen to the original version of the master.
Yeah.
But it's not the version that I fell in love with on TikTok.
Yeah.
So I might not even go and listen to it more than once when I go to a DSP.
Yeah, because you may just not have the connection
exactly
to it.
Yeah. And also I just want to be clear as well that you also are very familiar with this because this is something that you also identified very heavily in UMG in your time there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was...
Nima and I just spoke about.
Yeah. Love Nima.
So yeah, he's the best.
Yeah. I mean, well, that was a big part of it, right? Like Lucian was very interested in derivatives, you know, and therefore I was like very like interested in it, you know, like we did this JV for Simon Cowell with TikTok called Stem Drop, which was like a political nightmare, like trying to get anything done. But there was a lot of research done just in terms of like, you know, derivative works licenses and how all of those things worked. And part of the reason that I was involved in that project is because, you know, my job when I got to UMG, you know, at the end of the day, I was like Lucian's personal consultant, right? Like where he would, you know, field problems from, you know, whoever's emailing him at 2 a.m. and he would forward it to me and be like, figure out what's wrong with this, right? And then that kind of evolved into more of an R&D agency in the center where we were kind of like the Trojan horse that would work alongside the deal team. And deal team is, you know, going in and doing a new deal with Spotify for discovery mode. Right. And it's my job to come in and, you know, figure out how discovery mode works, you know, and then take those learnings and bring it back to the labels. So they don't have to get off of the treadmill that they're, you know, running 12 miles an hour on, you know, and then that kind of like rolled into other things. But, you know, what we found with the remixes and the mashups and things like that, that was happening on TikTok is that you had a huge amount of commercial value for those things. Like when we were able to get them cleared and then release them onto streaming platforms, they were going crazy. You know, like, and they were making like real money.
Yeah. What's an example of that one?
Like The Weeknd's Die For You.
Yeah.
Right? Like that was like a massive resurgent song for Republic. And to their credit, you know, they saw the opportunity and they got on board 100%, ended up getting, you know, Ariana Grande on a remix. But that started from, you know, this TikTok creator in North Carolina who's like a really big Weeknd fan who Nima found, you know, and this kid was just doing these sped up, slow down remixes of the Weeknd.
Yeah.
You know, and at one point, you know, this kid was responsible for 7 out of the top 10, you know, sounds for the Weeknd on TikTok.
No shit.
You know, and one of those, you know, songs was this slowed down remix of Die For You. And that started this resurgence for this song that came out in 2016, you know, on Starboy that, you know, now like 2022, you know, it's having its biggest moment ever. You know, Ariana Grande gets on the remix. I feel like it got like Hot 100 or like number one or something like that. Yeah.
Funny story about that. I was actually in the studio at Republic over here.
Oh, for real?
When Wendy got the file.
Oh, no
of
way.
Ariana. Yeah, and we listened to it. I was in there and we listened to it all together for the first time.
Yeah. Now that's an example of...
And that one got it to number one the following week or 2 weeks later. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to use that. That's an example of like the record label You know, I mean, there's a million good examples. Like they are like Republic, you know, especially there's really, really like, I don't want to give the wrong impression that, you know, there's not like incredibly talented people. Like they're the best, you know, like what.
No, I for sure. I know. Yeah.
But that I think was a really good example of like that idea doesn't make any fucking sense. You know, if you were to tell The Weeknd in 2016 that this song that he puts out, he records at Conway, you know, like spends hours agonizing over, is going to go viral because some college kid in his dorm room like slowed it down. And that's going to cause it to get so popular that Ariana Grande is going to jump on it and it's going to get a number one hot. That does not make any sense.
None.
You know?
Yeah.
So for Republic to, without even missing a beat, being like 100% where that's what we're going to do, you know, like I think is a great example of like, that's how it should work. Right. Like that's a new technology. That's a new trend. And without, you know, getting frightened by it, you know, it's trying to figure out how to make it work. And, you know, back to your point with Lucian, I think that that's what these new deals are about, right? Like they're not the same people that got scared of Napster.
Right.
You know, and I was at a lunch earlier today with, I'm not going to say which company, but one of the deal team people from one of the big three. And he was talking about some of the, you know, new gen AI deals that they had just gotten done, but like AI deals in general. And one of the things that I thought was like so interesting is that he said that they've been so happy with how these tech companies have been coming back to them and taking their requests like seriously in terms of like the types of deals that they were trying to put forth and the types of models that they were trying to build. And I just thought it was like so interesting how different it probably was, where again, you're talking about those deal teams that were getting done the first like streaming, you know, deals, and everybody just thought digital was the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much more intelligence, you know, now. And I think, you know, ultimately these deals, like they're all getting done in the benefit of artists. Like it may not seem like it, like right now, because people don't see that like things have switched. You know, they haven't communicated from the rooftops, you know, that their business model has changed, but it has. Like you don't need a performing artist in the same way that you used to when, you know, Elvis Presley was getting discovered, right? Like you go back to the origins of the music industry and it started with a publisher and a songwriter. And the songwriter needed the publisher to create sheet music, you know, and then song pluggers would go and perform those in like bars, you know, and that is what drove the revenue for the industry. And then you get into broadcast technology and recording technology, and the publishing company needs someone to deliver a performing artist because the composer doesn't do that, you know, and the performing artist, and then there's marketing, and then, you know, we get these big larger than life like celebrities. Like, tell me, when is the last time that an artist has gotten signed that's not K-pop, where they don't write?
Where they don't write?
Where they're not writers?
Great question.
They don't, you know, they are the performing artists. They are their own performing artists. So this is a very long-winded way of me getting to like, the artists are their own performing artists. So you know who they need to be able to perform and market is the fans. They need the fans to be able to make derivatives from their original and go out and market and promote those things.
Right.
And I think that's what is so exciting about, you know, from, you know, what MBW just said about like the Suno and Warner deal, where like Warner's looking at Suno like a superfan app.
Yep.
Like, well, it's not too hard to imagine a world where, let's assume that whatever this deal is that they've figured out, there's an economic model attached to it, where an artist is going to get paid, the songwriter is going to get paid. I can guarantee you that the publishers are not going to get screwed in the same way with these payouts in the way that they were with the streaming platforms.
How so?
Right? Like, well, you think about the traditional, Spotify payout where there's $1, Spotify keeps 30 cents, 70% like goes out, that's shared 55 to the master, 15 to the publishing company. That is because the streaming platforms didn't really need the publishing companies. They needed the artists to sell subscriptions, right? Like that was the whole, they need Taylor Swift to, they needed Drake and, to come out on stage, The Weeknd to come out on stage for Apple Music, to sell subscriptions. They didn't care about, OVO 40, like people behind the scenes that are doing that. Suno, Udio, these new Gen AI platforms, they need the composer. They need the publisher. So at the very least, like we know that they're going to split like 50-50, like because you need the songwriter now in order for you to be able to generate things,
make the derivatives.
Right. So the value of the new release master is falling as like an individual asset, but you've got the value of the copyright increasing, and you've got this army of derivatives, being generated by fans that are going to start making their way to commercial streaming platforms. Like Spotify has started to talk about, they're going to have, artist, centric AI, artist friendly, ethical tools like that on the platform. Like they just released the weekly fan stats. That's the beginning of fan competition, right? Like you think about like what do you do with your Wrapped?
Right.
You go and you brag about it online.
Right.
Like if you're able to see the week after an album comes out, who is the top Taylor fan, Taylor Nation is going to go crazy after that, competing, for the right to be able to be that top fan.
Right.
And we just need a commercial workflow to be able to sort that. And I think that is probably going to come in the next 2 years, like how that, works out. I don't know because we don't know what these deals look like.
What's your prediction on how these things might work out? Because from everything you're saying, from the things that I've been reading, it seems to me like Spotify is positioning itself to access the fan, the super fan, to create these derivatives on their platform. And so now there's there's going to be more than the one master composition. There'll be the Weeknd's master composition, and there'll be the super fans compositions as well, the derivatives.
Yeah.
On this platform.
I mean, that's what we hope they're going to do, right? Like, I think we know based on some of the moves that they're making that like UGC is coming, like they just announced like video in the US.
Because the important part, hold that thought, because the important part of that is that kid in Kansas City who did that record, who did the sped up or slow down version, he didn't monetize on that.
No, not at all.
He made $0.
Well, he made money, but like he made money on a commission, work for hire. Like he's getting paid once, he's not making royalties.
He's not making royalties, exactly, in perpetuity.
Yeah. So, which means that he doesn't have an incentive to market or promote it.
Correct.
After that initial transaction.
Correct. And now with what we're talking about here, there is the incentive over here because now they also have rights. They have copyright here.
Well, I think like, again, if we go back to Lucian's memo, right, and we start to like unpack, some of the things that have happened, just over the course of the last year. Like, in the memo in particular, he mentions a company at the very bottom of the memo called Sound Patrol.
Right.
Sound Patrol, what they are, apparently focused on is copyright attribution, right? So if they have, figured out a way to be able to, attribute a percentage of a copyright from a Gen AI, creation, even if they can't do it 100% like accurately yet, there's steps that are being made. And again, like everything that is in that memo is a signal. It's there for a reason, right? So if they are messaging to the industry that, they are taking steps to figure out copyright attribution, it must mean that they're taking Gen AI, pretty seriously.
Yep.
They want to be able to track the Gen AI versions that have the most commercial value to them. So let's make an assumption that, we're going to have some type of attribution for these things. The other thing that I think is really important to think about is the publishing deals that are getting done. Like these direct deals that are happening with Spotify, for example. Like we don't know what's in those deals, but we know that it's something more than normal, because that's how they were able to get around the laws that had been in place, which is why they hadn't gone direct, 10 years earlier. Right. So like we know that Spotify is getting some type of additional right, that is justifying, UMPG and these other publishers to go direct to Spotify. So we know that the majors are, and Sound Patrol, apparently has done deals with all of the majors, not just UMG. But even without the copyright attribution, even without Sound Patrol, the fact that you've got this UMG, and Udio, announcement, you've also got the Warner and the Suno announcement. And let's focus on the Warner and Suno one, because I think they've, talked a little bit more, about what they're planning, or at least, that's come out more through the MBW article, and that they're looking at it as potentially like a super fan, platform. If they're planning to give their catalog to Suno to be able to, to train and then Suno users use, then they don't need the attribution. The users asking to use Ed Sheeran,
right,
or asking to use like Cardi B. So they've got the attribution right at the source, so we can, I think, make another assumption that they've figured out some type of commercial licensing model with Gen AI, like whether it lives on Suno or it's able to leave Suno and make it to Spotify. There's some type of commercial model here, right? And then you also look at like some of the Spotify announcements where they're talking about, again, like bringing Gen AI and things to the platform. It's not too far-fetched to think about like, well, what if they like bring some type of like Suno, into that platform, and, fans are able to, listen to a music, a song and make a derivative, from that, then those Gen AI versions, are the perfect product for those algorithms on Spotify. And with personalization, it means that we're not going to hear the different derivatives. Like you like a rock version, you're going to get the rock version. I like a hip hop version, I'm going to get the hip hop version. I'm never going to get programmed the rock version because I don't like it. Right. But all of those things are going to move through the exploitive algorithms faster, and they're going to find audience faster. So you're going to eventually see, like on the aggregate, the volume of these derivatives is going to equal what you used to get from a big hit, in a regional programming model, right? Where it was the 10, Lady Gaga's all putting out 10 songs, and the aggregate of that market share equals the same amount of album sales.
Yeah.
Right. The derivatives on the aggregate are going to equal the same amount of the copycat Lady Gaga's earned you with all of their,
right.
Aggregate releases. So it's really just like a game of moving chairs, right? And you go back to, I keep going back to the early days of the music industry, and then again, thinking about this Goldman Sachs article in 2022 is, in the modern day, you don't need a record label to do the things that you used to need them to do, right? You don't need them to put together a performing artist and a marketing campaign for you, because you're doing that anyway. And they recognize that, which is why the position towards, direct to consumer and e-commerce, because the idea of what you traditionally thought as a record label doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is there was an article on MBW as well with Spotify and the majors doing a deal, and there was something else there that speaks to what you're talking about, where Lucian says, it is essential that we work with strategic partners such as Spotify to enable Gen AI products within a thriving commercial landscape in which artists, songwriters, fans, music companies, and technology companies can all flourish.
Mm-hmm.
So what that essentially means to me from everything you're saying is we're going to unlock a bunch of capital.
Totally.
Money, revenue is going to come in. And you could say that as easy as saying Spotify, the whole idea or the conversation that Spotify has been capped in terms of users' growth in North America. Well, if you now have a super premium tier of $19.99 and you get 10 to 20%, what is it, 10% of 770,000 users to buy in, it's $1 billion.
Yeah, and you start having, money come back into the industry.
Exactly.
I think a big reason that, music became, less sexy, and the pivot towards, e-commerce and direct to consumer was so attractive is because a lot of these, big streaming markets had matured.
Yeah.
Started to slow down in growth. So, the fact that we're, talking about, and it's not just him, but Lucian has been shouting from the rooftops, Artist-Centric, for years. It's not fair that,
let's talk about the difference between the two, Artist-Centric and
Pro Rata.
Pro Rata, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell me the difference between both here?
Yeah. So in Pro Rata, which is the current model, you're basically getting paid the same as Rain Sounds, right? So based on your distributor's market share, you're getting paid, a certain amount.
Yep.
And the size of their market share determines, what that amount is. So, UMG may be getting slightly more than, Warner because they have slightly more market share. But essentially everybody's getting paid the same as Rain Sounds. What Lucian had, and, some other, Rob Stringer and,
Robert.
and Kinsel as well, have been pushing for is the concept of Artist-Centric, which is, artists who are, bringing more audience to the platform, should be getting paid their fair share,
Okay.
And, that's something that, Spotify's, response to that was essentially, trying to get rid of stream fraud, like
Artist-Centric.
Well, by removing as much, fraudulent content as you could from the streaming pool, like hopefully that's a more pure payout to artists. It's not changing the licensing that they were using, I
don't think that worked though.
Well, I think they've done like a really great job with stream. I mean, stream fraud's like, it's crazy, like I was on a couple different research projects at UMG where we looked into like some of these stream farms, especially the ones like, Central Europe and stuff like that. And, it's no joke. You're talking about like warehouses of just, cell phones, just streaming like this amount a day. But like there's a lot of money laundering like happening, things like that. So Spotify is absolutely, taking it as seriously as they can, and every single platform is as well. I think Spotify was getting the most attention for it,
for sure.
Because I think that's where it was happening the most.
Yeah. I guess it's just one way that it was explained to me that it makes a lot of sense is like you can't. It's Spotify is an easy target, but I mean that's like trying to move the Titanic when the iceberg is right there, right?
Yeah, totally.
But also, you got pirates coming from all different places that are very nimble.
Yeah, for sure.
So it makes things very challenging,
totally,
to figure that out. But you're saying here that what I'm hearing you say is that the artist-centric model clears you of those street frauds?
That was Spotify's response to it. They were like, we're not going to change how we pay out, but we're going to try to remove the garbage.
Yes,
right?
yes.
You had other platforms like Deezer, which did take a more, artist-centric approach where their payout formula was different for superfans. And, based on a percentage of streams from, a cohort of your audience, like you were able to make more money from that. Like SoundCloud had a similar approach. I don't remember exactly what the economics were there, but you've had a couple platforms that have tried, to be able to do this.
Okay. Do you know the economics of Deezer? What it?
I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was based on like repeat listening engagement,
Gotcha.
like engagement from your fans, in like a period of time, and really all of those platforms are collecting that data.
Mm-hmm.
Deezer just, wanted to, create a model to reward artists in that way.
Can I ask though, so what if the artists and the songwriters don't want to have derivatives of their records? Do they have a choice if they're signed to a major?
Yeah, and that's kind of like what we're seeing from the Suno, deal with Warner, is that they were very clear that the artists have to opt in.
Right.
Which is like great. I think that's a good thing. Like you've got these people at the majors where like these are really, really challenging decisions and challenging deals because they're setting precedent.
Yeah.
When they get these things done, they can't just like experiment with something and then go back, or they're going to get crucified.
Right.
With doing these things. So, the people who are making these deals, again, like they're doing it in the best interest of the artist. And I think, again, like from Lucian's memo, like I think they're trying to walk both of these worlds where they don't want to be, make the Napster mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Like what would the industry look like if they had gotten streaming deals done in 1999 and 2000 and hadn't lost 10 years?
Yeah.
So I think that, that's weighing on them a lot. Like we can't miss this opportunity, but at the same time, we have to protect our rights holders and, our art, and I can absolutely say that, the people that are doing those deals, like there's an elevated level of care that I think that you get from like working directly with the artist that only happens from the manager and in a lot of cases the label. You know, like they bleed, you know, for these artists. So these people who are trying to get these deals done, like, you know, they're trying to do it like honestly in the best interest of music and the industry and having something that's going to survive, you know, and not just like disappear.
That's interesting. Where does that put the independent artists? Because as you and I both know that, you know, the front lines, the artists, new artists, those deals aren't happening as much as they once used to.
Yeah.
So where does that put the independent artists in?
Well, I mean, it's like,
when you say scary, what are you referring to?
Well, I mean, it's scary in the sense that there's a lack of knowledge being passed, I think, right now, with the fact that a lot of the majors like have, you know, changed their business models.
Yeah.
You know, it's not to say that they're not, you know, interested in, you know, breaking artists and breaking hits, you know, like they were before. It's just that they recognize that it's a business, you know, and there's, you know, other ways that you can make money from that business. And, you know, streaming isn't always like the greatest when you're making the same as Rain Sounds, you know? So I think that you're seeing like a lot of people like trying to do the best that they can do, like as we're preparing for like whatever it is gonna be, you know, next. But for like an independent artist, and you know what I was trying to say with like the lack of knowledge is like TikTok happened at the same time as COVID. The music industry like turned upside down at the same time that like marketing workflows like weren't working anymore. So you had all of these bad practices that started to come to, you know, fruition, like reality. There is like tried and true, like proven workflows that do work, you know. The record labels gave up on music and algorithms like way too early because they had these revenue targets. They didn't have time to figure out like how to market effectively. So the answer was just, let's lay off the marketing people and just focus on e-commerce until, you know, Gen AI fixes itself, right? Which means that like for an independent artist that is on its own, you know, the idea that you're going to go sign a record deal and the label's going to come in and develop you and, you know, you're going to be Olivia Rodrigo is like pretty unlikely, right? Like the kind of model now is you come in and you build yourself up, and, you know, once you're earning money and you've got a brand like starting to build around you, like then let's work together and, you know, we'll be there for you.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think they're being very clear about the fact that they can't provide services in the same way that they used to. And that leaves an independent artist with, you know, not very many options, you know, in terms of like trying to have a successful career unless you find a great manager, you know, like somebody like you who's going to come in and say like, this is how you do it. Right. Like otherwise, you know, you're going and you're, you know, doing a distribution deal, you know, maybe you're getting like a little bit of marketing, you know, from that. You don't know what to do with it. Right. Everybody else is spending money on TikTok. So you should spend money on TikTok too.
Right.
You know, the best practice is to spend pre-release, you know, so by the time that your song comes out on commercial platforms, like you're out of money, and then you're just in traffic, stuck with everybody else, like hoping that you're going to go viral on TikTok to resurrect your career.
Right.
And that's not a very hopeful, I think, opportunity for an independent artist. Now, that's not to say that, there's a lot of incredible tools that are being built, that allow, independent artists, management, companies to do things with AI that you don't need like a big record label anymore.
Well, what are some of those tools? And can we talk about the tool that you've been building as well?
Yeah.
Because you went public with it. You signed an artist as well.
Well, a big reason why I left, UMG is, we were having these conversations about e-commerce is the priority, and, direct to consumer is the priority. And I came from music, I don't want to sell t-shirts.
You don't want to sell t-shirts?
Right? So knowing that, all right, they're going to start firing all the marketing people, I better get down to work and figure out how do we automate the steps that, a human expert would take, right? Because those people aren't at the labels anymore because they got fired, right? They got laid off.
Yeah.
Right. So and the ones that are there, they can only really service the big superstars because those are the ones who are making money.
Exactly.
So even if you care, even
Doesn't
you
matter.
could love an artist that's signed to your label, if that artist is not making money, you gotta say bye.
Yeah.
You don't have
lose your job.
Or lose your job.
Yep.
Right. And that's a horrible position that, a lot of the really good people at the major labels struggle with, is trying to be, everything, but just not having the hours in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So really what I, set out to do when I left UMG is to, build a record label in your pocket, right? If these people aren't going to be providing services anymore, then how are people going to, figure out how to develop themselves? How are they going to figure out how to market and promote themselves? And a lot of it has to do with, the data that you're looking at.
Yeah. And so, because talk to me a little bit about that, because you mentioned earlier a new song doesn't have a whole lot of data points.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So the point of a new song is to figure out how to build as many data points as possible. Is this what you're trying to activate?
As many data points as possible while keeping the cost of your marketing as low as possible.
Okay.
Right?
Of course.
It's all about optimizing your position in an algorithm at the end of the day.
Yes.
Right? And if you're able to optimize your position, then the algorithm is really good at what it does.
Yeah.
If you were to look at a viral trend on TikTok and you remove the content and you just look at the behavior of the virality, right? That's a perfect example of an algorithm which has identified a piece of content that they know improves user experience, and they've identified a list of users that they want to send it to. And when it knows those two things, it's super quick, right? There's audience that can be gained. You just need to be able to control it and coordinate it and time it in the right way. It's the same way that if you think about, you're riding down the highway in a car, right? We live in LA, if we were going to get from the west side to Silver Lake, you're going to take the 10 like east to west.
Any Canadian government officials are watching? I live in Toronto. Go on.
Yeah, we're in.
No, sorry, go on.
Everybody's going to basically take the same route, right? Everybody's going to be in the highway.
Yeah.
But, you can also take surface streets, right? And you can put in GPS. And even though we're all going in the same direction, we all have different destinations, right? And it's no different than when you're talking about an algorithm on a platform, right? Like you're all going somewhere, but you all have a different audience that you need to be able to get to. And that's what the algorithm is really trying to figure out is everybody that's in line, who should it send to? Mm-hmm. And you can, no different than, waiting in traffic. If you know what your position is, you can pull off of the highway and you can take a surface street for a little bit and you can jump back on if you see that opportunity.
So how do you know your position in that?
Well, again, I think you need to be able to focus your data really around like 3 different areas, right? There's engagement, there's exposure, and there's passion, right? Engagement is controlled by content. That's things like your music. It's things like the video, social, like likes, comments, shares, like things like that. That's your market fit. Like that's what you're putting out into the market. Mm-hmm. And what do you hope to have from that? Like you hope that your sales, are going to convert to happy customers, right? That's passion. That's what Spotify is trying to find. They prioritize passion because that, proves user experience. And that's what they're ultimately trying to do. They're trying to get people to stay onto the platform longer. Mm. So it's the relationship that your content has with converting to user experience that's sending like a huge, signal to the platforms. And then you combine that with the amount of exposure that a piece of content has, and exposure is controlled by push marketing, right? Those are things like playlists or ads or UGC. It's being able to expose your audience to a bigger audience,
yeah.
And it's the dynamic between the 3 of those things that make you go on a platform. And if where you sit in those different components, then it's just a recipe of figuring out like, how do I gain this? How do I pour a little bit more of this in here? How do I do a little bit more of that? The challenge though that we have is that the data is changing every single day, right? So like the Earth, it doesn't seem like we're moving 1,000,000 miles an hour, but we are around the sun, and that data is always moving. And you have all of these different, disparate data sources that are, telling you this or telling you that. So what the reason I had a lot of success, back when I was at Spotify, is because I learned how to program, based on me knowing what Spotify's, programming values are, what they're trying to accomplish, right? Again, they're prioritizing quality, not quantity. It's a little bit of both, but it's more so like as soon as the quantity is enough and the quality's there, like they're ready to go.
Right.
Right. So, the reason why my playlists in particular were successful is because I was able to look at data and predict based on these passion signals how a song was going to react in a particular playlist. And that's the reason why I would move things up or I would move things down, because I was looking at these qualitative data points to be able to tell me like how to guide it through the ecosystem to be able to find audience. And I knew that it was going to work before it got put in that playlist, like based off of these passion
And you'd always get it right more times than not?
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was instances where, 100% like went too early on certain things, so like
right.
I had to
remember those conversations. True.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I definitely had to modify, my formula, to again account for exposure. It's kind of like if you like a practical example I like to give is that if you imagine like Billie Eilish in the Troubadour, fits like 250 people. She's going to sell out that show. And there's going to be a line of people like around the corner. You take Billie out of the Troubadour and you move her into the Staples Center, that audience that she has is going to sustain as she gets into a bigger space.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like, even though at that small amount, it's tight, but you can see because it's Billie Eilish that she's going to work in that bigger space. Right now, you take that same scenario and you put a high school band in the Troubadour, and you look at Billie's crowd and you look at the high school band's crowd, they're going to look almost identical, right? Everybody's like packed in, they want to see Billie Eilish. It's a really, special occasion. Well, the high school band could have called all of their friends and family, sold that out. Yeah. You remove the artist and you just look at the audience, and those behaviors are going to look, identical, so you need to know that one is Billie Eilish and one isn't, before you move them into the Staples Center. And I definitely think that there was probably a couple different times where I took someone from the Troubadour and tried to put them into the Staples Center before they were ready. I probably should have stuck to the El Rey, and let them live there for a little bit. Right. But, you could always tell that it was going to work, based on these passion signals. Like I always knew that the audience was going to respond because I was looking at these qualitative metrics that Spotify was using in order to, improve user experience, and that was, the basis for a lot of that year of Spotify's programming strategy. And again, it's, Doug Ford, was a really influential person who didn't get a lot of credit because he came up with this strategy called the Syndicate, which was essentially a collection of, coordinated playlists. And, from, that idea, I started developing this hit acceleration strategy that would eventually lead to those genre groups that we were talking about, right? Where we're all looking at data in the same way. And if it works for a territory, we're adding at the same time. So that's where you got a lot of these big hockey sticks, is because back then, you had a team of 100 editors, all looking at data in the same way and trying to communicate with each other. Like it became a lot harder for the current, music team to be able to do that because, there's different, initiatives within the companies like market bets and things like that. But in those early days, that's what we would do. We would talk to each other, and we would meet and we would say like, what are you seeing in Norway? And I'd be like, this is what I'm seeing in the US, and this is what we're seeing in Australia, and we would all look at these passion signals that were relevant regardless of genre, culture, or region, meaning like they're universal qualifying metrics, right? And these things are really what the Spotify algorithm is built on top of, right? Like, so again, important distinction, like Spotify, they're trying to, improve user experience. Yep. They do that based off of passion signals, and it takes time for them to identify those things. Like TikTok, interest signals, they don't necessarily care that you like it. They just care that you're interested in it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
So, so point being is that, that is what, you know, my company is trying to solve for, is like building this intelligence layer, you know, connecting that to an automation layer, right? If you have the intelligence, you know, sorted out, and you can take these disparate data sources and you can unify it through a North Star metric, you know, no different than, you know, north, south, east, west, like a GPS, right? Like, you know what direction you want to go to, and then you can personalize your directions in order to get to your house, not my house, right? Because we have different addresses, but maybe we live, you know, 2 minutes from each other,
Sure.
right? Like, that type of navigation is absolutely possible by being able to pull out those passion signals and being able to combine that with the engagement and the exposure to get an idea of where you sit within these algorithms. And then from that, you can tell what is your capacity to be able to move forward in line in the traffic jam. And that's what it's about. Like, can you continually move forward while keeping the cost of your marketing as low as possible?
Yeah.
And if you can do that for long enough, you're going to be in front of people long enough to be able to convert into fans. Like, that's the biggest issue that we're having right now, is that artists aren't breaking, songs aren't as big as they used to be. And the reason is that no one can get in front of an audience long enough to be able to convert into fans. So they got to do gimmicks. You know, like, you look at like the Role Model song, like Sally, or you look at like Sabrina, you know, and like Juno Position, or the Arresting, like Every Night, right? Like, you have to create like a marketing moment around it, so you can stay visible long enough so people can fall in love with you, you know, versus in the old days, you used to be able to get that from, you know, radio programming or, you know, Spotify regional programming. If you're able to manipulate the algorithms in a way that they can do your bidding, you know, then you can find audience. It may take time, but that's the way that it used to be also. Like, we've gotten to this mindset of like, we got to go viral right away or we're dead. You know, it used to take years to break an artist. You used to go market to market and get audience. And that was okay because you believed in the artist. And now you're like, I need to make my, you know, my nut in 28 days or like I'm out, you know, like, and that's why the managers now do artist development, not the labels, you know, because the managers have to stay with them. You know?
But it is starting to see that like artist development is coming back.
Absolutely, it is.
In a major way.
It's coming back because now the managers are getting label deals, you know, because they are the ones who are breaking the superstars. Right. And you're proving that if you actually bet on talent and you stick with it, then there's a there. You know, and I think that is what we're seeing now with the newest crop of superstars. Like, in a lot of cases, they're on a JV with the management company. You know, and then the management company is doing a distro deal with the label.
So do you see, are you suggesting that there is a world where the gimmick is no longer necessary?
I hope so. Like that would be, I don't think it's ever going to like go away, because I think like content is such and storytelling is like, it's such a big part of it now. I think like if you look at what like Atlantic is doing, you know, it's incredible, you know, like just in terms of like how invested they are in content as much as the music. You know, now like Charlie XCX is doing movies, you know, like I was walking down the street the other day in Venice and I saw a billboard for Alex Warren, you know, doing a concert, but it's like, it's funny. It's not like a traditional like billboard, like come see Alex Warden at the wherever he's playing, the Staples Center. It's literally like it's a funny advertisement. Like that's great content. Like I think the smart people are recognizing that you have to tell stories in addition to writing great songs. And that's again, like I think the role model song would have been a hit in radio era too. It just had to get in front of people. And bringing people out on stage where we're performing it every night is the best way where you could get viral long enough to have people listen to it.
Yeah. You talk about this 28-day window, though. The 28-day window doesn't have much to do with the algorithms on DSPs, or does it?
Well, it does in the sense that, discovery mode starts after 28 days, So like, if you think about where all of the traditional marketing levers are in the music industry, it's first month, like first 6 weeks, like at the latest. But that is where we have built all of our marketing levers. Once, and again, that's where the qualitative data, becomes so important, is that as you move farther away from release date past those 28 days, when things start to naturally decay, it becomes very difficult to differentiate, down on the ocean floor between a rock and a piece of gold. When you're looking at just quantitative data, when you're measuring how much of something exists, when you're combining the qualitative data, then it doesn't matter that it's still like a small audience. You can tell that this is Billie Eilish. It's not a high school band, and therefore you need to market and promote Billie Eilish because she belongs in the arena. But that's not happening because the release cycle is so fast now. And no one knows what to do, so they just put out more content. Didn't work, new song. Didn't work, new song. Just keep going. And what ends up happening is you dilute the brand and you dilute the quality, and that ultimately like hurts the artist brand, and I think that like that's something that I really regret from, building New Music Friday is, seeing the damage that workflow caused in terms of quality to an artist's brand, and I think that that's one of the things that I wish that we had done a better job of, is like figuring out like how to preserve the quality more so, and figure out how to extend the life of some of these songs that like we knew were hits. We just didn't have marketing levers at 3 months, at 6 months. Like we didn't have the ability to connect with radio and marketing, because back then we weren't able to talk to them a lot. We weren't able to get information the way that, information is shared today. It was still very much like everything was controlled through the label, the major relations team, and the major label. Yeah.
Fascinating stuff, man. Fascinating stuff. Yeah. I do think about a lot of how an artist is supposed to get in front of an audience now. And when I talk to independent artists or managers, I do tell them, I'm like, can you keep your recording costs down? And if you can keep your recording costs down, it is a game of quantity. You want to have quality, but like to earn a living in revenue, you have your examples of artists who release a song once a week, once every 2 weeks. And it's kind of because the costs are lower now to make music, to distribute music. You can do it more frequently. But you're right, it does it definitely dilutes the quality of the artistry.
Yeah.
But that's how you get in front of them, because it's like on week 85 of me putting out a song, it finally connects and it goes like a hockey stick.
Back then we didn't have UGC, to be able to keep the attention.
Right.
We just had that one song.
Yeah.
So like, again, you look at a lot of
literally
Atlantic's,
that one master.
Yeah, that one master. Like Atlantic fires so hard on content and storytelling because they recognize that is keeping the engagement. If you look at the Alex Warren campaign for Ordinary, and you take those three things, the engagement, the exposure, and the passion, and I wasn't sold on Atlantic's approach at first, because they're not, 10K. Elliot has been incredible, to me, just in terms of like putting, an arm around me and introducing me to Lucian, and he's really, been a friend. But like looking at this as like an unbiased, thing, 10K hasn't, traditionally been known for developing artists.
Correct.
They come in and they get hits and they get market share. But I think, from looking at a lot of what they are investing in, and by investing, I mean traditional, marketing like types of content. And you look at this Ordinary campaign and you can see the engagement and the exposure. Like the passion was like through the roof, from day one. Like obviously it had gone, viral on social before that. But when you look at the data and you can see the engagement, exposure move together, that tells me that's a coordinated marketing campaign. That's not reactionary, waiting for a trend. That is, we recognize that there's something here in the data that is telling me that this song is special, and we are going all in on content and marketing, push marketing, right? Like playlists, UGC, like influencer marketing, things like that. And it follows the passion and the streams, like pretty much up to the point where, it hits the Hot 100, like that. To me, I was like, damn, Ellie's got it, like good for him. Like,
You
like
figured
that is the type of, services that artists need.
Yes.
Like that is what is going to break artists and is going to break hits, is getting these things in front of people in a way that is not annoying, in a way that is compelling, and you're keeping their attention. And then you have great music too.
Yeah.
Like the songs haven't gotten worse in the last like 10 years. Like, so why aren't the hits as big as they used to be? It's because it's being controlled by algorithms, and we're letting the algorithms control us rather than us, using the resources that we have to figure out like how we manipulate the algorithms to have them do what we want to do, and that's aligning incentives with what they're trying to accomplish, which is, improving user experience, getting people to stay on the platforms longer, right? So it's not about these sales KPIs anymore. It's about these qualitative KPIs. Like who owns qualitative KPIs? Like who owns passion? Fans, so if you can keep the fans engaged, which is what, direct to consumer and all that stuff is all about. It's literally like staring them right in the face. Like I don't think that they've put all of the pieces yet together where you've got, Gen AI licensing, you've got attribution, you've got derivatives, you've got a super fan experience, and then you've got, fan generated content that is being monetized by the rights holder and the creator.
Right.
That's really what it comes down to. Back to the Die For You example, Tristan XO, which was the creator's name, like after we wrote him that first check, like he had no incentive to market and promote that version of the song. He wasn't getting any money on it.
Yep.
If he was getting paid on the back end, then he's got an incentive to go out and market and promote. So it's like a street team, that's getting paid based on, how much audience they're bringing, how much revenue they're bringing for the artist.
Yeah, exactly. No, that makes a ton of sense. I think everything that you're talking about over here is definitely going to show itself in the next 12 to 18 months.
I think we're getting there.
Yeah. Man, Mike, is there anything else you want to?
No, this is a ton of fun. I mean, I always love seeing you, and thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, man. I hope this is the first of many.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I really do appreciate everything that you said here. If there's, you know what, I do have to ask you this because sometimes I forget to ask the guests, but you brought it up a couple of times. But I would love to know a couple of books that you love to read and that could be helpful for those in the music industry. It doesn't have to be about the music business either, though.
Sure. So I'll give one book that I want to give two books.
Yeah, please.
That they're not music industry related, and they're not like personal books that I like, I'm attached to or anything like that. They're just two really helpful books that I wrote. One is called The Perfect Algorithm by this author that I'm not going to remember his name, but his first name is Pedro. You can just Google the name of The Perfect Algorithm.
Yeah.
What it does is it talks a lot about data and it simplifies it into, there's basically, 5 different tribes of algorithms. And if you can learn what those things do, you can do a lot of, pull a lot of insights from the data that you're already looking at today.
Interesting.
So I would recommend The Perfect Algorithm. And then there's another book that has been like really impactful for me and the company I'm building, Big Effect, which is called Competing in the Age of AI. And what that is about is the early days of Amazon and how Jeff Bezos, saw AI coming and started to integrate it with everything that, that Amazon is, and to see, these stories, like later on looking back, it looks so obvious, now, but I'm sure, back then it wasn't, and that's something that, we try to do with our company where everything we're doing is AI first. Like, how do we automate this? Like, how do we involve AI in some capacity, not like, Gen AI creation, different things like that, but just in terms of like, how do we use AI to remove a bottleneck? We have a record label now, and we've started to release music, and the artists that we're signing are, other than our clients that are primarily like catalog funds, these artists are the first ones that are getting access to these tools. And my whole, belief is that if I can bring them closer into the decision-making process of marketing, we're going to get a better result, right? It's like you think about you looking at a stack of photos with you and your friends. Yeah. Like you stay a little bit longer on the photos that you're in, right? There's all of this information that, artists should be aware of that is either too complex or just not visualized in the right way to meet them where they're at. And if you're able to put that artist in the marketing loop, my personal belief is that we're going to get better results every single time. And I think that's really how we scale services, So for the independent artists, you're not going to get your stardom from a traditional record label anymore. You're going to get it from working with an AI.
Yeah.
And the AI is going to teach you like how to market and promote yourself, and it's going to be these AI tools
based off
that
of
are
the signals that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Are you ever going to commercialize this tool that you have
absolutely.
here to the public?
Yeah, we're doing beta like right now. It takes a long time with like science, especially when you're talking about like money. When you're telling somebody what to do with their money, you got to be right. You can't like make a recommendation and then it doesn't work, and then you're like, oh, shucks. So we're spending a lot of time, getting the math right and, getting our AI right. We brought on a really, super talented team, domain experts. So, later this year, we'll start to release more. Like later this month, we're going to have a couple more case studies, like based on whenever this comes out. Things like the Alex Warren example, like I gave. What's so cool about what we can do is I can see everything. So I can literally see what I used to be able to see at Spotify.
Oh, wow.
But now I can do it with Apple Music. I can do it with TikTok. I can do it with Amazon, all of YouTube.
With the tech that you're developing?
With our technology, because we can infer like all of these different things. If we're not getting direct data, we can create proxy metrics. We can create derivative, metrics from, other metrics that allow us to, again, make certain predictions.
Yeah.
And, we've got the secret sauce in being able to do that. So, what I want to be able to do is take this and literally like give it to everybody. If you look at the music industry's, entire new release market share from the time that I was at Spotify to the time that I wasn't, and I'm not saying it was like just me, we had a huge team working, but it was a lot of different factors, right? Like part of it was like the editors couldn't look at data in the same way anymore, because now you've got market, structures in place and they have to go through different protocols to be able to talk to different markets. It's much harder to coordinate the way that I was able to do back then, because I didn't have the handcuffs on that the current team does. But the processes and the mechanisms that I used, we've captured in our data platform and our algorithm. So it allows me to, again, like see this air traffic control tower where even if I don't own it, I can still see what's happening, and I can comment on it.
I saw you comment about that. I want to say it was in May. There was an artist that you posted about on your stories, and you said, I have nothing to do with this artist. I just see that things are happening and going in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the message was, do what you will with this information because it's going good for you.
We see it all the time.
What was the name of the artist? Do you remember the artist that I'm talking about?
I don't remember.
It was just very rare for you to post. And I remember seeing your story pop up.
I want to say it was Culture Wars.
Culture Wars.
Yeah. Like a Nashville band. But I mean, you see examples of that, every day.
Yeah.
It's just like, what does it look like today?
Yeah.
Like, and that's the thing is that it's always moving, it's always changing. So you have to stay on it. Yeah.
I'm excited to see what you build. I'm excited to see everything I'm excited to see everything that you've been talking about for the last couple of years come to fruition. Mike, man, I appreciate the time so much. You're a brilliant man.
Oh, man, I appreciate you.
And I'm excited that everybody that gets to watch this gets to see and understand who you are and how your mind works and how much value you bring to this business. And we're all very fortunate to have you in this music industry. Wow. Why you're in it, I don't know, because you could be doing anything else. You're a pretty brilliant man, though.
I'm very grateful. I'm I'm grateful for you having me here, giving me the opportunity to,
absolutely,
to speak
man.
and talk
Absolutely.
about my ideas.
Over the years as well, you've been great to Byron, myself, Jesse, everybody, So, man, it's been awesome, man.
You guys are super talented. It's easy.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Appreciate you.
Cool.
Cool.